Hi friends, for those of you who might be newer to astrology, today I'm going to share a hot take on Saturn to help you get started understanding this much maligned planet. Well, let's start with a few basic ideas about the astrological meaning of Saturn in the birth chart. In our psyche and experience, Saturn relates to time, accountability, restriction, and limits, just to name a few things. Saturn has to do with the principle of maturity, and it's there to make us aware of the kind of action that would be the right thing to do, especially when we'd much rather do the fun thing or even the irresponsible thing. Saturn makes us aware of what's real and tangible. Saturn has us asking ourselves, is this really feasible? Or is it unrealistic? Saturn relates to the part of our psyche that considers pitfalls or potential negative outcomes or worst case scenarios. This part of our Saturn function gets a bad rap, but it's helpful as long as we don't go overboard with it in a way that keeps us from living our life fully. Now, fear is a normal part of life, and fear alerts us that we need to pay attention. We're not meant to totally eradicate our fear. We're meant to pay attention to our fear and then think about what could go wrong and then make a plan. Maybe we take into consideration and decide to ditch the plan. Or maybe we come up with a plan B just in case things don't go as planned. But the point is that we consider what could go wrong and then take appropriate steps from there. And that's a healthy functioning Saturn. Like Mars, Saturn's also a no planet, so it helps us set boundaries. Mars says, no, I don't want to do that, while Saturn says, no, I can't do that. Or, no, I don't have time for that. Or, nope, that's not my responsibility. Speaking of responsibility, Saturn has to do with learning to take personal responsibility so that we can also develop our own inner authority. But we have to be careful not to go overboard with personal responsibility in thinking that we have to navigate life completely on our own without any outside help. Now, this is a great topic to spend more time on, but I'll save that for another time so we can get into Saturn rulership. Saturn's the ruler of two signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. There's an underlying symmetry and meaning with our dual rulership system in astrology. When a planet rules two signs, it rules over one diurnal or day sign and one nocturnal or night sign. For instance, Mars rules nocturnal Scorpio and diurnal Aries. For Saturn, Capricorn's its nocturnal sign and Aquarius is its diurnal sign. These distinctions have a technical application in our tradition, but we can also read into them energetically. Now, a chart with Capricorn or Aquarius rising will have Saturn as the chart ruler or the ruler of the ascendant. Saturn's especially prominent for those folks, and that's one way that Saturn can stand out in a chart. If there's a different sign in the ascendant, Saturn will still rule the two houses that have Capricorn or Aquarius on the cusp, no matter where they fall. For instance, if a chart has Aquarius on the cusp of the fourth house, Saturn rules the fourth house in that chart. In some house systems, signs can be intercepted, so reading the rulership becomes a little more complicated if one of those Saturn signs is intercepted. Some astrologers will then just consider the sign on the actual house cusp in that case, while others will consider the intercepted sign ruler as a co-ruler of that house. If you're using whole sign houses or the equal house system, you won't have any intercepted signs, and Saturn will always rule two houses in those house systems. Now let's look at actor Lakeith Stanfield's chart and take a look at his Saturn placement for an example. I've run his chart using the Porphyry house system. Lakeith's Saturn's in Aquarius, so it's in a sign that it rules. This gives it a clear channel for its expression. Aquarius is a fixed sign, so this is a Saturn that benefits from taking its time, and being in rulership means that Saturn processes like maturity or responsibility are really important to pay attention to. Now, there might be some natural gifts to mine in this placement, but they don't come without doing the work. This is also a rather unshakable Saturn, and when it's working well, it's aiming for the long game. But being overly attached to its point of view, this is fixed air, that can cause it some trouble along the way. While Saturn in Capricorn is about building structure, Saturn in Aquarius is about improving structure. Saturn in Aquarius often has a rather cool vibe, and it has a vantage point on systems that has it approaching things more conceptually than simplistically. Lakeith's Saturn is in the fourth house in Porphyry, which would point to some kind of restriction in his experience of home or roots, which could be turned into a positive by setting limits himself and making wise, grown-up choices in that area of life. And he probably had to go through the school of hard knocks to learn that. Speaking to some kind of restriction on that level, he once said that he grew up very poor in a fractured family that was dysfunctional on both sides. Now, in whole sign houses, Saturn would be in his fifth house, But in both systems, Saturn rules the 4th and 5th, so the 4th house focus comes into play either way. Saturn's also making a trine to his ascendant, so it's going to show up in how he presents himself and in his character. In our video about Lakeith's Mercury being conjunct his ascendant ruler, we talked about him as a thinker, and now we see he also has this serious side to his personality. Saturn hasn't been looked at favorably in our tradition, and that's still the case today. Part of this is just natural because when we hear the word restriction, it sounds like something we wouldn't want. But we all know it's possible to have too much of a good thing, so restriction can be our friend. A little dessert as a special treat now and then can add some sweetness and pleasure to our life. But a big dessert after every meal comes with a cost, and one cost is to our teeth, which happen to be under Saturn's domain as it rules the bones. We all have to choose to restrict ourselves sometimes in order to make good choices or responsible choices or healthy choices, and Saturn helps us do that. Saturn gets extra focus as a planet that's out to cause trouble for us, in part because we're wired for negativity bias. This just means that our brains are hardwired to overemphasize the negative and downplay the positive. For some reason, our brains just don't do the math fairly on this one, and it's said that it takes 5 positive experiences to balance out just 1 negative experience in our brain's measuring system. I talk about this in more detail in our courses, but for now, just know that there's actually a neurological reason that we give Saturn a lot of attention. We have to put in some extra work to see Saturn's positives and then to work with those intentionally. We get to do that on Saturn's training ground, and that includes any situation in which we face responsibility, accountability, maturity, or authority. Now, these words probably invoke complex feelings in you as they do in most of us. I find that a lot of people hear the word accountability, for instance, and think, well, that means taking responsibility for what I've done wrong. But that's only kind of on track. Accountability is really neutral. Really, accountability should just be about simple math. Let's say I set a goal of calling 5 friends to catch up with over the course of the next month. If I'm doing accountability well, at the end of my month, I check in with my progress and I ask, how many friends did I call? Well, let's say I only called 3 friends. If we go in the wrong direction at this point, when we realize we came up short, we might turn up the volume on blame, and in a worst case scenario, maybe that even goes into shame. We think things like, I'm a bad person because I didn't meet my goal, rather than simply, I didn't meet my goal. But positive accountability looks like this. I set a goal of calling 5 friends this month, but I see I only called 3. Why was that? And how can I achieve my goal next month? It's just accountability without blame. That's what we're aiming for. The message here is that how we express Saturn in these moments is up to us. Well, next, let's look at a word cloud of some Saturn keywords. Look at your own Saturn placement as you're looking at this list and see if some of these show up in those houses that are connected to Saturn in your chart. I'm not going to read through all of them, but here are a few good ones. Responsibility, melancholy, time, negate, definition, seriousness, pessimism, and gravitas. Well, there's a lot more we can say about Saturn, but I hope this gives you a start. Learn more about Saturn and chart interpretation in our course, The Social Planets at Astrology University. And until next time, take good care.